So it was a smart move on the part of Mountjoy. And then he went off and became, I think, the Earl of Devonshire, if I remember correctly. I make these wild statements, and I hope, and I'm going on video, and I hope later, but that somebody said, the idiot, it's not Devonshire. I think he was, I think he became the Earl of Devonshire, but he certainly retired well in the English system and became a Privy Council and all that good stuff. So that's really why it was a Mountjoy thing, a Mountjoy trick, so to speak. And in many ways, Mountjoy and O'Neill were equals. They'd both grown up in the system, and if O'Neill had played if he had never really strayed once he got back to Rome, he probably would have had Mountjoy's job. He was a better general than Mountjoy was, and was recognized. The Henry of France, Henry of Navarre, when he did go to, after the flight of the Earl, he declared him, I don't know, it was the second or the third, certainly the third greatest general in Europe, meaning that Henry himself was the best, but he was, O'Neill was considered a great general, a great military leader. Anyway, it's important to understand why he left, and all these notes are no good to me because I can't find anything in them, so I have to go. I had big long pauses here trying to find what I'm looking at. I can never do that, but I can tell you from memory that even though probably O'Neill was genuine and was smart enough to understand that he wasn't in a position to dictate or to get any more than he got. He was very happy with the deal that he got. But there was a man called Chichester who was not. And Chichester was one of the first really big planters. This was before the big plantation came in. But anyway, the Chichester family and they all took the O'Neill name. If Monsignor O'Neill was here, he'd tell you all about the Chichesters. But anyway, it was probably through the connivance of Chichester, who actually had become Lord Deputy, that really was determined to get rid of O'Neill and O'Donnell, get rid of those guys.
And the Lord Deputy then represented the Queen, or the Crown.
Correct, and he was very much part of the Irish landed gentry. Chichester was, so that he was quite a different animal to the Queen or James. The London people wouldn't have seen. They wouldn't have been near as. They would have been quite happy with the settlement with O'Neill, and would have taken him at his word. And actually, James the First got on personally very well with both O'Neill and O'Donnell, until Chichester or somebody soured grapes and convinced the king that in fact these guys were not to be trusted, and that they in fact were plotting against him, which probably wasn't true. But it wouldn't matter, because if the king believed it, you're toast. But what's interesting, again, I'm away from my notes on this. You remember a story I told you about Granuaile arriving at Holt Castle, and they hadn't. He was having dinner or something. He hadn't enough time. Anyway, she captured the son and brought him down to Mayo, and they had to finally come down and get him, and they offered a ransom and all that. She said, "No, go away with your ransom. I don't want any of your ransom. What I want from you," and she wanted to teach him a lesson, because they were English essentially. The Gealic thing, how the sacredness of hospitality. I want you, the price for returning your son is that you will always have your door open, and you'll always have a spare room at the table. And the name of the guy was Christopher St. Lawrence. I think Christopher was his first name. the family name is still St. Lawrence, and I stayed in their hotel quite a few times in the 70s in Ireland when I was. And it was still St. Lawrence family.
Where was this?
In Howth Castle. It's now a hotel. Anyway, I mention that because that little boy grew up to be an important part of the English system and was a very flamboyant soldier and had a lot of I mean, one could make probably an incredibly romantic movie about the guy, because he was all of the things that you would see as a dashing soldier and all the rest of it. And he was also very close to one of the O'Donnells of Tyrconnell in the Netherlands, or in the Spanish provinces. But I think they were gay. The stories that they were just a little too friendly. It seems to me that they were looking back on it now and looking. This Lawrence, the kid that, again, what a fascinating story his life story would be. The reason I mention this is that he was the guy who essentially, probably doing Chichester's bidding, who actually personally went to Lord Cecil, who was still probably his son, I'm not sure, the counsellor to James, and convinced Cecil, and who in turn convinced James that Hugh O'Neill was plotting against him, and that was receiving money from Spain. Now, he probably was in touch with Spain. There probably was something going on. But I don't think that Hugh was planning another rebellion. But that's only conjecture. But what's interesting is that this kid, no longer a kid now, you know, he was an officer, and had fought and worked, because they used to bounce around between Austria and, you know, they were basically mercenaries. But he was also very much involved in the politics of the day, but played a crucial part in totally changing King James I's view of Hugh. And the moment that he did, it was obvious, because the letters, everything changed. And Hugh knew right away that his goose was cooked. And almost coincidentally, he got a letter for him and O'Cahan, who was a chieftain up in the north, to come to London to resolve a legal matter about some land that was in dispute. Now that, if you know back to Silken Thomas and the uncles and all that stuff, that was a favourite trick of the British, was to bring you back there on some supposed business and clap you in the tower, or else drop you from it or cut your head off. So Hugh knew, he knew at that moment that it almost didn't matter, and there was no point in going back there and protesting his innocence and all of that stuff. It was done. He understood the power politics of it well enough to know, and he knew that Chichester was the one who would do him in. So there was a moment at which he knew he had to do something. He didn't quite know what. And well, yes, but it was very difficult to run. Very difficult to run. And also he understood too that because he had seen the politics that were going on over Kinsale, and he would be the obvious one who would say, he was the general in command of the whole thing, that the Spanish, or the Spanish were basically in the town just as a show more than for real. Anyway, Maguire, who was also a chieftain in the north, you know, there's various of these chieftains, had I'm sure because he understood that he wanted to get a number of these people out, had actually bought a ship in, I'm not sure if it was Spain, Holland or France, doesn't really matter, an 80-tonner. And he had sailed it around to the north of Ireland, and he had guns and what have you on it. And he was stopped actually by the British Navy between Scotland, because you know there's that narrow little leg. It's only like a very narrow little strait. So the British haunted that spot, you know, between Antrim and Kintyre, so that you couldn't come up or down there. So it was very easy for the British Navy to intercept anybody coming or going through that narrow spot. So of course he was intercepted there, and they searched his ship. Unfortunately, he had nets and various things, and having weapons on board wouldn't necessarily be that incriminating,